the fan favorite. The man got me started in radio. I think I've said it before. I think people are probably sick of the story. Garland hit me up. I was doing my YouTube channel, and Garland was like, "Hey, would you like to come on?" And I was like, "Yeah, okay, fair enough." I drove up to the radio station. I get into this kind of back and forth with Lee, and from that point on, I'm hooked, just completely hooked. Radio became a thing to which I enjoyed and which I love doing, even more than TV, by the way. I know some people prefer TV just because it's TV. But no. Radio gave you this ability to have a long form conversation with somebody beyond this kind of 2-minute soundbite or this 3-minute bite. It allowed you to actually dig into a conversation, to talk to people, to come up with different points of view. They could be right or wrong, but at the very least, you had the opportunity to talk to them in a way kind of like the Rogan show, where Rogan gives you this kind of 3-hour setup to have a conversation where you can delve into all sorts of things. No, I appreciated it. I enjoyed it. But I see my guest in the background, the one and only Michael Maloof. Michael Maloof is a former senior security policy analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense, an author, regular contributing analyst on RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 years of federal service in the U.S. Department of Defense. Welcome to the show, my man. How you doing this morning?
Just great. Hunky-dory peachy cream.
Hunky-dory peachy cream. Man, I'm glad that you to have you on the show. I always appreciate you joining me. I want to go to this first to get your take on this. So this article came out, I think it was yesterday. At least I saw it yesterday. And it's been getting very much buzz for obvious reasons. And threats pointing out Trump's Mideast envoy forced Netanyahu to accept the Gaza plan he repeatedly rejected. Israeli sources said the involvement of the incoming U.S. administration, led by Trump's aggressive Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, revived Hamas hostage, the negotiations with Hamas. While Netanyahu's propaganda machine claims that Trump forced him to approve a deal that he repeatedly was against. People are being very skeptical of this. And I think they have a right to be skeptical of it, considering the Biden administration, the transparent lying that those sociopaths, Blinken, Miller, and Joe Biden was doing. And up to this point, I am of the mind that Joe Biden might not have even been entirely running his foreign policy, considering he was out of his mind starting on day one, according to the publications or the media reporting of Joe Biden's cognitive fitness and health. But that said, Donald Trump has said, "I'm going to end wars, not start them." But people assumed that Trump would be completely obsequious to Netanyahu for the people that Trump put into the administration. Those people are insane. Or for that matter, some of the things Donald Trump has said about the war, criticizing Joe Biden for not being as belligerent as he could be, I suppose. But after putting out the Jeffrey Sachs clip on his Truth Social, where Netanyahu is called a deep, dark son of a bitch, and after Donald Trump have kept saying, even told the Muslim community, "I'm going to end this war. I'm not going to start more wars," he puts this out, or this comes out. And so, yes, people are skeptical of it. By the same token, from my point of view, that could be a bit of, I think it could be right. But give me your take on this. How do you view this? Do you think this is propaganda? Do you think this is just Donald Trump trying to beef up his bona fides before getting into office? Or do you think there's some credibility to it that Trump might have told Netanyahu, "I want this war over with before I get into office"? Give me your thoughts.
Well, thanks for having me on, Jamal. I think President-elect Trump is sending a message to Netanyahu that he's not going to get engaged in an endless war. He realizes from his first administration that he was dragged in, that Trump was dragged into agreeing to drop out of the JCPOA when Iran was in full compliance. And it created major tensions afterwards. It even allowed Iran then to switch over to become a threshold state. It became a self-fulfilling prophecy. We didn't want them to have nuclear weapons. We're going to punish them more and impose sanctions even greater. But that prompted them to become much more self-reliant, to become much more capable, and become a threshold, a nuclear threshold state as a consequence. And that's where they are today. That's where Iran is today. That said, Netanyahu has made it clear that he has ambitions to go after Iran. Mm-hmm. Trump does not want to get into a war, another war. That's very, very clear. He is staying, and we can see what's emerging here is more of an approach in foreign policy by Trump that emphasizes more of a respect for spheres of influence. In other words, that's why you see him focusing more on Greenland, Canada, Panama. He's not saying, I mean, you hardly hear a whisper out of him on Ukraine. And Kellogg, who was going to go to Ukraine, canceled.
Right.
So, so much for a priority there.
Yeah.
But I think he's sending a message. And as you pointed out, rightfully, he published that Sachs interview, which was very condemning of Netanyahu. And that's sending a message. That is sending a message. And I think Trump is saying, look, I'm not going to go through this again like I did the first time. And you're going to have to put up. Now, this creates problems for Netanyahu internally. He's got to deal with Smotrich and with Ben-Gvir because they want to take over all the lands in Gaza and in West Bank and up even all of Lebanon and probably Syria. They want to go into Damascus, and then they want to go to as far as the Euphrates. This is their biblical vision. So I don't think Trump wants to put up with that. And it's clear to me that his emphasis will be more on a respect for spheres of influence. That's why I'm going to be, before I came on, I had a private conversation with a friend who was talking about Far East. How's he going to react to Xi Jinping and Taiwan? We haven't heard a peep out of him. Is he going to emphasize or underscore the one China policy and look upon that region as China's sphere of influence? We've got to see. I don't know yet, but he clearly raised the whole concept of reintroducing the concept of spheres of influence from the Brzezinski days to Putin in his first administration, and then it ended. And so I think we're going to see, and I think we're going to see the beginning of the end of NATO. So all of these things are coming together, and Netanyahu is just one element. Netanyahu's got other problems. It isn't just Trump potentially, but he's got Erdogan, the president of Turkey, who wants to create a neo-Ottoman empire. He's got and that's going to clash with Netanyahu's and Smotrich and Ben-Gvir's notion of reestablishing a greater Israel. We're going to see clashes, and already Erdogan is talking about wanting to take back Jerusalem. So what does that portend? And if you have HTS saying the same damn thing.
Well, he talks.
Jelani has said the same thing.
When Jelani has been as obsequious to Israel as the Biden administration. I mean, like they've said over and over again that they don't necessarily want to have conflicts with Israel. And if you remember, like Israel had been bombing the hell out of Damascus. And when the foreign press agent for HTS was being asked about it, he was like, we're not interested in getting into a conflict with Israel. Jelani has said as much. I've heard him on video saying as much. We don't want to get into a conflict with Israel.
But he's not going to remain in control. He said the next stage, Jelani has said the next stage will be Jerusalem. He has said that. And consequently.
When has ISIS ever attacked Israel?
They haven't yet, but they will, according to him. If you listen to Jelani, if he stays in office. But look, HTS helped create a power vacuum in which Erdogan has now stepped in. This means he's now controlling, in effect, Syria, and that's going to conflict with what Israel wants. And at the same time, it's also creating yet something else. That is a potential conflict with the other Gulf Arab countries, other Sunni countries that do not want a neo-Ottoman empire. They do not want to live under that. And now, now you have, and now you may have an interesting condition here where Iran and Saudi Arabia may join forces against Erdogan and his ambitions to recreate the Ottoman Empire. So this all is coming together here, and it's happening even before Trump can get into office. I mean, it's happened. I mean, events are moving in near real time, and they are very, very complicated. It's like peeling the proverbial onion. You know, we're going to be seeing all kinds of new ins and outs here, and you've got a figurehead in Lebanon now who is a product of the West, but he's feckless. So he's just a puppet of the U.S. And Erdogan sees that, and he wants Lebanon anyway. I think the Russians need to go in and take over the ports in Beirut.
Really? I mean, okay. Let's step through that because you said a lot. Let's step through that one piece at a time. Yes, Lebanon has gotten a new prime minister or a new president. He is clearly a puppet of Western interests. Israel invaded, and he didn't fire not one shot from the standpoint of the Lebanese army.
Right.
So they got who they wanted as their puppet. Turkey and Erdogan, I agree with you. He does have these kind of expansionary ambitions, but those expansionary ambitions are now going to run up with Israel's expansionary ambitions to create their greater Israel. How do you think that's
Trump does
work?
not want to get in the middle of that. And I would add, just as he's criticized Netanyahu by releasing that piece by Sachs on his Truth Social, he's praised openly Erdogan. So that suggests to me Trump is signaling that he's going to be taking certain sides in that dispute, and that Netanyahu had better fall in line. Now, what does that mean internally? It could result internally in Israel. That could create the conditions for conflict and potentially the fall of Netanyahu politically.
I know, but if Netanyahu's government falls, it's just another creature that takes over after the fact, right? Like you have a country of fascists, especially the ones who are in power. Netanyahu, weirdly enough, is like a moderate within the context of the fascists that are in there.
Well, that's what puts him up against Ben Gvir and Smotrich. They don't think he's radical enough, and they're dragging him along. But if he wants to stay in power and not lose, and he still has those court cases that he's got to face.
That's right.
He's going to go along with them reluctantly, I think, up until a point, unless and until he gets quiet pressure from Trump, who says, "Look, if you continue on, I'm just going to cut you off." I think they're at that point.
How do you think? Like, there is talk that they're going to annex the West Bank at this point, or for that matter, annex parts of Gaza itself. How does that work? I mean, they already have this kind of apartheid state. It seems like it would just be rank, raw apartheid. I guess let me just ask it flat. How does that work? How does what does it look like for them to annex the West Bank? This seems to be fraught with all sorts of difficulties.
Well, with Trump, he Edelman, the woman, the wife of said, "I'll give you $100 million for you take over West Bank." Is he committed to that? I don't know, but that was a condition. On the other hand, and in meantime, you have Smotrich and Ben Gvir pushing to push settlements.
That's right.
Into those areas now,
right,
as well as Gaza. So that means that it will, in effect, be an annexation. Will Trump go along with that? If he wants to work with Saudi Arabia, he's going to have to tell Netanyahu to knock it off, because the Palestinians have got to go someplace. The Saudis have agreed to a two-state solution now, in light of the way Palestinians have been treated, and that is the condition for normalization. But you have Saudi Arabia, meantime, that wants normalization with Israel, but at the same time they want a recognition of the Palestinian state, and also a reinvigoration of the Abraham Accords. So how do you deal with
square that circle?
Yeah, how do you do that? And this is where it's going to take someone like Trump to just come in and say, this is the way it's going to be, and if you don't like it, we're not playing ball with you, and by the way, we're taking back our marbles with us. We're not going to be giving you anything else. And this could have a major impact. And I don't think Trump cares about lobbyists or anything like that. You know, other presidents like Biden have been influenced by AIPAC and the defense establishment, but Trump seems to be impervious to that kind of pressure. And I think he's not going to bend to it. So I think he will go with what is best for U.S. security. How does it help us? And we will not. And I think he does not want to. You get the impression he does not want to engage in a conflict where there's no end game and benefit for the United States. I mean, look from since Afghanistan to especially Iraq that I was involved with, we haven't gained anything out of that, except that we've created even greater problems. In terms of
Trump has said that, to his credit.
Yeah,
he said
that.
Yeah. He said the exact same thing.
So all of these things are evolving. How do they translate into policy and the implementation of that policy? And that's what we still have to see, because you have so many variables that are coming in, but if he remains undeterred and stays focused, these other things will fall in line, and he's going to have to basically tell the likes of Netanyahu, either you go along or I'm cutting you off.
Is Israel ballsy enough to attack Turkey if indeed they come to some kind of border dispute, either in Syria? That's where the rubber meets the road, right? I mean, it's a NATO nation.
Well, let's put it this way. Yeah, well, it's not just that they're a NATO nation. They haven't been engaged in any conflict, so they're fresh. IDF is worn down, and Turkey has the second largest military in that region. Yeah. So I think Turkey probably, if it came to a military conflict, theoretically, Turkey probably would prevail pretty well. You got Turkey being able to do its own indigenous war production. Yeah, Israel relies a lot on external help. So I think the odds would be against Netanyahu. He's just got to, it's going to be up to Netanyahu to look at his political strength as to whether he can keep the likes of Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and there was one other one.
Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, those are the main two.
There's one other one. There's one other one now who's the
one for the ICC,
the foreign minister, these guys are so far out, are such extremists, and in their own interpretation of what is the destiny of the Jewish state, that they unless Netanyahu can corral them, we're going to see inner turmoil in Israel itself.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I mean, you're right. The Middle East is a mess. And I honestly, I don't know what that looks like. Israel
it's been like this for 5,000 years. Go on.
It's for 5,000 years. It's just an immediacy with these kind of major powers that have balkanized Syria at this point, where all of them are kind of taking shares in parts of that country. What's wild about it to me, HTS has been saying, we are going to make Syria whole. And Turkey has said the same thing. We are going to make Syria whole. Okay, That means, A, you got to get rid of the Kurds somehow. That means you have to get rid of the U.S., who has a presence in Syria. Now, the U.S. may pull out under Trump. Trump doesn't seem to be all that hopped up on Syria. I mean, even the last time he was in office, he pulled back on Obama's attempt at regime change, even though he kept the oil. I have a hard time framing what that looks like going forward. So I agree with you. It could be a mess. And it could, both Turkey's expansionary aims and Israel's expansionary aims could come to loggerheads, which again puts the U.S. in this weird position of having to be a kingmaker and try to keep these two out of each other's throats.
In that regard, I think Trump, because of the complexity of all that, may just yield to someone like Erdogan to let him do his thing.
Yeah.
And so that he can focus on other things. Look, Trump has made it clear that his focus is on renewing America and trying to get us back. But if we're all fighting foreign wars all the time, look, the amount of money that we've sent to Ukraine, 250 billion, is what they're now estimating is going to be the cost to rebuild in California.
Wow. Just think about that. All of that money. And you think to yourself, what do we get out of it?
And what do you have to show for it?
Losing war. 500,000 Ukrainians dead, 100,000 Russians dead, all of that territory lost. I mean, like the calculation of it is just astonishing. By the way,
and that doesn't include reconstruction.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. How do you think he's going to ultimately, I mean, for one, do you think Trump is going to be able to end that war in Ukraine? He does seem to have, at the very least, created a context of language to describe it that is more along the lines of, well, NATO expansion was a red line. Everybody knew NATO expansion was a red line. Like, at the very least, he started to accept the language of it in a more honest fashion, which is what is necessary, as opposed to Putin just wants to take over all of Europe. He wants to use 150,000 troops in order to take over Europe and go to the France, the border of France. Like, just nonsense talking points that these guys were effectively using when they were talking about it before. He's at least hit upon something that is far more honest in an assessment.
Well, it's historically factual.
It is true. That's what I mean. It's true, right? In a way that they weren't talking about it before. But still, it's the issue of how do you end it? That's the issue. Because Russia's not going to accept a frozen conflict. I mean, a frozen conflict.
But you basically isolate Zelensky to the point where he has no further options. You begin to cut him back. The Europeans can't support him alone, and they've conceded that without the United States, they cannot do it on their own. So just by attrition, this thing is going to come to I think, could just come to a logical end, because he doesn't have, Ukraine does not have the infrastructure to manufacturing infrastructure. Europe
so you're not thinking of a political solution. You're thinking that they're just going to come to an end on the military, like the military is going to collapse.
Well, his military is on the verge of collapse, and the Europeans themselves, they're really and they're beginning to get pissed off at Ukraine, because Ukraine is trying to hit that Turkish pipeline,
Turk Stream, right?
And Turk Stream, and that is the one stream that goes into Europe. And that doesn't bode well for Zelensky and maintaining a friendship with the Europeans. Like, you want to cut off our own energy just to spite your own face. They're not going to buy into that. Look, the United States is I think Trump is going to raise the ante on NATO. He's going to say 5%, or I'm not playing ball with you. And the Europeans are going to just say, we're just going to have to, we can't match that. And because we have our own indigenous buildup we've got to do for ourselves, our industries, they're short on gas and what have you. And the Europeans already see that what Zelensky is doing by aiming at the Turk Stream, it prompts the United States then to start selling LNG at even higher prices.
Yeah.
And that's just going to absolutely bankrupt Europe. It's going to bankrupt them. Because they don't have any other alternatives. And if that pipeline especially is finally hit. Mm-hmm. So The Europeans may basically also tell Zelensky that the game's up. It's going to come to a slow demise in which Zelensky or whoever succeeds in, or there could even be an internal uprising within Turkey, within Ukraine itself, in which other folks say, look, Zelensky doesn't have any authority anywhere. He's he's under martial law, but his term expired way back when. Last May. Yeah, of last year. So, and the Russians have already said they're not going to negotiate with him. So it's these are, and Trump is probably thinking, why do I want to get involved in all this? I'm just going to end it.
Yeah.
And move on.
Yeah. I mean, how does NATO, I've asked this question before to people, but I'm curious about your take on this. How does an organization that was set up in order to be a bulwark against the Soviet Union, and they go on for 50 years or more, give or take, they finally have a major contest against a vestige of the Soviet Union, which is Russia, which is not as powerful as the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was massive, had multiple countries, so Russia is smaller. And yet, Russia is outproducing them 3-1 and has effectively crushed the proxy that they were using to go after Russia. Like, that's astonishing to me. How does NATO survive that level of humiliation going forward after this war?
It doesn't. It's going to crack up because it's going to probably, my personal view is that it's probably going to fracture into smaller defensive alliances. Yeah. The Scandinavian countries, the European countries, African countries, they're going to be truly more defensive. And I think you're not going to, I mean, right now, NATO is 32 countries. You can't get them all to agree on anything.
I know. I know.
Slovakia and Hungary, especially, they don't agree with the direction NATO is going. And even Rutte has the Secretary General of NATO has said, you either go along with either you build up militarily, or you settle in, or you migrate to New Zealand, or you all learn Russian. He's made this clear.
Oh, that's too funny.
I think there's a message there, and that's coming from the Secretary General of NATO.
That is too funny. You guys need to learn Russian because they're going to kick our ass. Yeah, that's pretty astonishing when you think about it, right? The guy who's supposed to be fighting the Russians is telling them, "Hey, y'all better learn Russian." In a conflict that
I mean, he's giving them choices.
Right. 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 I mean, but he says something like 10%. I mean, in fact, I think I even have that speech that he was given when he was pointing out, he says, look, Russia is outproducing us 3-1.
That's correct.
And we need to increase the amount of money that we're putting into NATO. And I think he said 5% wasn't enough. I think he went up to like 10%. That the country
they can't even, half of them can't even do 2%, and to achieve 5% is you're already hearing them whine and moan about it, but 10% isn't going to happen. That's why I think you're going to see them become more inclusive among themselves, and you're going to see a splintering, a fracturing of the NATO structure itself. Ultimately,
individual or these smaller defensive groups.
Yeah, there'll be smaller defense alliances. I think it's going to evolve into that because and with Trump just beginning his term, he'll have 4 years. He's going to make it, and he's already agreed. He's already agreed that, look, NATO expansion is what caused the Ukraine war.
That's
and
right.
He's right. And Putin warned the United States, warned Biden, but because he was under the influence of the neocons, particularly Victoria Nuland and others, they talked down to the Russians. That really, and didn't treat them as an equal. a strategic equal, that's what's going to happen. I think Trump is going to treat Xi Jinping, Putin, as a strategic equal. And I think and you're going to have three adults in the room finally. They're all coming back to the room now, and they're all going to work together. They all respect power. They all are powerful people. And Trump doesn't believe in leading from behind. Mm-hmm. He's made that clear in his first administration. And when you see how he's acting now, acting preemptively in getting his administration going, it means business.
Yeah.
And he's not going to wait for events to happen. He's going to take preemptive action so that he can control events rather than events controlling him.
Yeah, he's elected to do it. This is Mark Rudd. Listen to what he says. Fascinating.
They were administration is that they were the ones pushing us for more defense spending. They were successful at this, and they were right. I mean, we did not spend enough, and now luckily we are overall close to the 2%. The problem is, of course, that in the meantime the 2% is not enough. And some of you asked me, okay, what should it be? I don't want to commit to a number, but as I said in my Carnegie talk after my speech, when you look, so let's say at a sort of first glance at the capability requirements emerging from the internal planning process within NATO, it will be north of 3%. But then you're right, if you do joint buying and making use of the NSPA, Luxembourg structures and everything else we have within NATO and the EU, you can deduct joint buying, you can deduct innovation. For example, Ukraine is experimenting with new radar systems, which are extremely less expensive than some of the more traditional radar systems to detect enemy missiles coming in. Just one example, if you do that.
This money that he's talking about, that these European states don't pay now, like the 2%, Donald Trump was chiding them because they weren't paying their 2%.
Right.
He's talking about like 10%. In this statement that he was given, he points out, let's see, right here. It says EU countries would have to spend up to 10% of GDP on military needs instead of the current target of 2% if they want to create a defense system outside of NATO. So basically, like if you want to do something that is not NATO, if you want to do your own thing, then that's going to cost you more money as opposed to just putting the money into NATO at the 2-3% or what Donald Trump is saying now 5%. It says right here, quote, it would have to be something like a European NATO, but then forget about the GDP. Then you have to increase defense spending to 10%, from 8 to 10%. This is what.
Well, if they want to do their own defense,
right?
But you'd see, he's saying all of NATO barely does 2%.
Exactly.
Trump is saying, okay, I want it at 5% as NATO, but they can't even meet that. So inevitably, what they're going to have to do is split off, and I think you're going to see a fracturing occur here. They're not going to be able to work in unison. And for what purpose? What Putin has demonstrated, he does not have territorial designs of taking over Europe.
Exactly.
He hasn't taken over all of Ukraine. You've got other countries in the West already that are trying to lay claim to portions of Western Ukraine because they don't really regard Ukraine as a. Come to think about it, they do not regard Ukraine as a separate entity, sovereign entity, because of the population that speaks languages such as still Polish, Lithuanian, Hungarian. So you're going back centuries, as I've said before. When you had the Lithuanian Polish Republic or whatever it was called, these are centuries old things, and people have settled there. So the question is, what is Ukraine? Because what Donbass and Luhansk are all Russian speaking, and they voted to be annexed to Russia. They voted. Right. As much as Blinken and company don't want to respect that and recognize it is a fact. And it was acknowledged, as well as in Crimea. these are Russian-speaking peoples, and they voted to return to Russia.
What does the new security architecture of Europe look like?
A mess.
Because that's what Russia wants.
I think he wants a diminishing of NATO. I think that if that doesn't happen, you're going to see the emergence of more of a Eurasian defense alliance, maybe under the auspices of the SCO, and Turkey's part of SCO and what have you. It's going to mean ultimately a fracturing of NATO, but I don't think it'll come to that. I think the Europeans, for their own survival at this point, are going to want to circle the wagons for themselves and be able to do what's necessary to survive and rebuild themselves, because they recognize that all the expenditures that they put into Ukraine have amounted to nothing. It's actually strengthened Russia. They can see that, and Rutt is conceding that. He's trying to be realistic for once, I think, more so than Stoltenberg ever was. Stoltenberg wanted NATO to be the defense alliance for the world. I mean,
yes, they wanted to move to Asia.
From the
they wanted to move to China.
Outer space. I mean, he was talking. It's as though he had lost his marbles. I mean, he was just going off on tangents, trying to throw something against the wall to see what sticks, in order to justify the continuing existence of NATO.
Let's take NATO into space. Let's go to Mars. NATO.
I mean, for what reason? For what reason?
Yeah,
but
I mean, I don't think.
But that, you see, that then creates a new arms race. That then brings in the Chinese, and you already have here. You had Stoltenberg talking about extending NATO into the Indo-Pacific region, and you even had traditional allies of the United States in that region say, "Well, no, I don't think we want a NATO in our backyard." Even the Japanese are saying that, have said that. I think the South Koreans did too. Those countries, in reality, do not want to go militarily up against China. They're not going to do it.
Wants them to, though. It wants to use them as a proxy. I mean, South
Under
Korea,
the Biden administration, yes,
exactly.
But I don't think under the Trump administration that's going to be the case. I don't think. But we have the incoming Trump administration really has not enunciated its policy toward China or the Far East. Well, in one sense, they have in terms of economic competition, and you have Trump talking about wanting to what good friends he is with the Xi Jinping. So a lot of this is personality driven as well. So this is something we're going to have to see how all of this comes together, and in which they begin to sort out things. That's why I think inevitably this is going to be you're going to see a revisionist form of spheres of influence in the world emerging.
That's what I wanted to get into for to close this out. Spheres of influence. You believe that's why he's talking about Greenland. That's why he's talking about Canada, Panama, etc. Basically, America as a whole. If it takes over the entire North American continent, then we are a much major power. We are much more dominant in the world. It seems though that doesn't this imply weakness? Like, doesn't this imply that he considers the U.S. being in a position that is nowhere near the capability of being able to dictate terms to the rest of the world, let's say that it was in 2000 or in the 1990s. And his remedy for dealing with this is to effectively annex Canada, Panama, and Greenland.
I don't think it'll come to an annex. I think ultimately it will be more of a extending of our dominant influence in the region. For example, the Greenlanders are already talking about, and even the Danes talking about us extending massively our influence of bases in the region. I think they recognize the geostrategic importance of Greenland with respect to the Arctic because that passageway is clearing,
Mhm.
and you're going to have more traffic going through there. Plus, you have the Chinese and the Russians already there, and they have actually set up bases. You know, and
The Arctic,
in
yeah.
terms of being prepared, for, and you have the mineral rights issues that are still unresolved, and this is something the UN is trying to deal with because Russia is going in trying to establish its domain over certain mineral rights in the Arctic. But with the passageways, with the melting of the ice flows, you're going to see in the future more international commercial traffic in those regions because the Arctic is the shortest point to all the capitals of the world when you look at it, and that's the same with the sending off ballistic missiles. If you shoot them over the Arctic Circle to a capital like Berlin or what have you, it doesn't take much time than if you were to shoot them laterally. And but if you go over the ice cap, it's a shorter distance. So it's going to that's going to have a significant military bearing there, and also the Russians have something like 40 icebreakers. We have 2.
Yeah.
And there's been no, and hopefully Hexeth will get on board and say, well, we've got to develop more icebreakers if we're going to be playing in the game. And I think that's probably inevitably what's going to happen. And you're going to see a whole shift in that direction militarily, because that's where the new conflict zone is going to be.
Oh,
Believe it or not.
I hope not. I'm
Well, it's
sick
going to
of
be
these
it's going to
conflicts.
be a competition.
Yeah.
We'll start off with competition.
Yeah, fair enough. I'll go with that.
But you have the Russians building tremendous military bases already up there, and the United States is just now recognized. Maybe we ought to start some military exercises in the Arctic to see how cold it is and how can we operate. Most of our equipment isn't geared for that.
Right. I mean, these are wars, though, that we hadn't necessarily, I would say, anticipated, or at the very least, not in those regions. I mean, the Arctic had been frozen over for God knows how long. It's climate change.
Well, that's why I think Trump is resorting to spheres of influence. He sees the strategic importance of Greenland. It is, and Denmark, which has no ability to defend Greenland in any way, shape, or form, recognizes, even without saying so, that the United States is the one that can really carry the ball there. I think that you see, Trump's approach is always to come off initially bombastic, come up with the idea, express the concept, to shock and once people get over the shock effect of what he's just asked for, like we want to annex Greenland or make Canada the 51st state, then they start negotiating back and forth. As far as I'm concerned about Panama, they're in violation of the treaty. We ought to just take it back.
They should just take the Panama Canal back from Panama. So why are they in violation of the treaty?
Because they're not because they are charging far more for U.S. shipping, especially warships. Secondly, it was given to Panama, not to the Chinese. The Chinese control either end, and that is also a means of them to acquire intelligence of our ships, especially our warships that go from the Atlantic to the Pacific.
I get the sense that this is just an excuse for military action. I don't buy the Panama Canal is Panama's. That's my take. The shipping thing, okay, that's a cost issue. You can that's like saying if Elon Musk charges more for Starlink, then you could just take Starlink. I don't necessarily buy that. But fair enough. I mean, I know that's what Trump wants. I mean, I don't
stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Do you think he's actually going to go after and take the Panama Canal?
I don't think he would have raised it unless he had
was willing to do it.
Concerns about it. Yeah, I think I think Panama is on notice that they better start working with him real fast, or they will implement that provision of the treaty that allows the United States to take it back. There is a provision.
Oh, there is. That I didn't know. So there is a provision in the treaty that the U.S. can assert so and so it's happening.
Military takeover of the Panama Canal. In essence.
Super interesting, man. Michael, man, thank you for this. I always appreciate your conversation. I always appreciate your point, your take, one way or the other. Michael,
well, I may be off on a limb on half of it, but
it's okay. I still appreciate the take. I mean, you can be right or wrong. You still get the right to have a point of view, which is a lot of what this is, because we don't know what's in Trump's mind, right?
That's right.
And we don't know what's in many of these leaders' mind. We're only trying to look at what they're doing to try to come to some assessment of what they're thinking. And what this stuff may come out to be. Look, he did bring up the Panama Canal. I agree with you with the spheres of influence stuff. I assume spheres of influence was just right for obvious reasons, right? It's like everybody's going to have this place where they're the strongest at, and it's going to go out in these kind of waves of strength. If you could think of strength as like a field.
I can give you an example. When I was at the Defense Department, Yeltsin didn't care about Central Asia. And we were able to move in and try to influence that region with our justice systems. In my case, I was training their border guards so that they could become independent and have their own border guard, and that prompted the Russians to withdraw. Now, that said, when Putin came in, all of that changed. Reasserted. Yeah, you see, it was all part of Soviet Union, and the Russian influence was very, very dominant. You had people there who would speak in Uzbekistan. They would speak Uzbek, but at the time it was minority speaking, and it was coming along. But Russian was still the predominant language. That has all changed. They've now become much more independent, but they still retain the Russian language. And that Russian influence remains. And we could see where, like Uzbekistan, having been just becoming an independent country at that time in the late 90s, early 90s rather, they wanted to assert themselves, and they would even Russian speaking and Russian types who were born in Uzbekistan basically were told your services in the military and what have you are no longer wanted. We're pushing native Uzbeks, and we're going to be instituting the language. So I saw an evolution of this over time occurring in terms of influence, but they still retain that influence from Russia. Russia still predominates as a result of Putin beginning to come back after the Yeltsin era to reassert Russian influence once again, and that still remains.
Wow. Michael Maloof, thank you, man. He is a former senior security policy analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense, author, and regular contributing analyst on RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 years of federal service in the U.S. Department of Defense, and he is a damn good friend of this show. Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate it, man.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. We have come to the end of this show, episode number 77, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. 77 episodes. Wow. We're moving along. We are moving along. I am going to end this